I'm professional investigator Justin Yentes. Here we cut through the noise, dig deep, and uncover what others overlook. If you're ready to roll up your sleeves and get to the bottom of the story, you've come to the right place. Welcome to Truth Be Found. Let's get to work. Welcome to Truth Be Found. Today we're talking about image-based sexual abuse, often called revenge porn, and why Arizona strengthened its laws to better protect victims in the age of deepfakes, AI, and rapid file sharing. My guest today is Senator J.D. Mesnard, who helped push a key update through the legislature in Arizona this year and initially ran in 2014 House Bill 2515 to establish Arizona's revenge porn laws. So I want to welcome you, JD, to the show. JD, could you tell our listeners, who might not understand what a state senator does, how you got into the legislature and what your role as a legislator is?
Absolutely. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me on. In a nutshell, we have 90 folks downtown Phoenix creating policies for the state, and 60 of them serve in the state House of Representatives, 30, like myself, serve in the state Senate. We have our annual sessions that begin in January and run until April, May, June timeframe, depending on a variety of things. And so we each year will pass a few hundred bills into law, most of which are sort of mundane, small, boring issues that nobody hears about or cares about, frankly. And then there are the higher profile issues that make the news or affect more people, and so those rise to the top. And so I've been doing that. I'm heading into what will be my 16th year. I served 8 years in the House, and now in my 7th and going into my 8th year in the state Senate.
Okay. That's quite a marathon of service for you.
Yes, it has been a while.
Now, before we get into the statutes and the case law, could you tell me what human story it was or what victim story it was that prompted you to introduce this legislation back, it's 11 years ago or so? No?
So, it was not inspired by a specific story per se, but I was reading the paper, and by paper I mean on my phone, and was hearing about some of the steps California had taken in light of what had been a guy named Hunter Moore, I think his name was, who had taken sexually explicit images of women, put them online to humiliate them, harm them, that sort of thing. I think it was selling them. He had some kind of website, and it caused a lot of controversy. At the time, smartphones were new. They're sort of embedded now in society, but at the time it was a new thing. And so it was this new way you could see where folks could hurt other people, generally in a relationship or former relationship context. And so seeing what they were doing, I don't often try to copy California, but in this case, appreciated what they were doing, right, and thought, rather than be behind the curve, responding after there is a long lineup of victims, let's try to be ahead of the curve and proactive, and what will obviously be a new way folks use to harm generally women. And so I introduced the measure in 2014, took a few years to work through the process. And as I did, then the story started coming out. I had a number of women all over the state contact me saying, thank you so much, here was my experience. And it was heartbreaking, but I was glad to be trying to do something to have a positive impact.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, from your vantage point, now that you've spoken to some of the victims of this revenge porn phenomenon, how has the pain of the victims been misunderstood by the policymakers and by the public?
I think
I'll say the honest, what I've heard many times is, this is a voluntary sharing, and these aren't actual victims. They're expressing their First Amendment right. How is this misunderstood?
Whether or not it's a smart idea to share a picture of yourself in a compromising situation with your lover, it is common. It's especially with, again, smartphones, and it's just so easy to do. And frankly, it can be part of, spicing up a relationship or whatever. I'm not here to judge, to each his own. But as you know, many relationships, many marriages go south, and then someone has this compromising picture of you. And, they might be hurting if they're on the receiving side of, a breakup, and unfortunately, it may be an otherwise good person, but just because they're upset or whatever, they want to stick it to that person that hurt their feelings, that caused them this pain. I want to cause them pain. And so whether, whatever drives them to do it, they end up posting these photos online. And it's, 99% of the time it's women that are the victims. And so hearing from them how this wasn't just a violation of their privacy, it was the nightmare of trying to go to the websites to get them to take it down, having their coworkers at work find out about it, and then it ruins their professional reputation. I mean, it's something that can impact all sorts of different areas of their life. And when it's posted online, it's on the web. I mean, it's difficult to unring that bell, so to speak. And so we wanted to create a consequence to that sort of harm that would meet what is the level of harm it creates.
Now, was there a moment for you where this kind of switched from a general policy position to something more personal?
I got asked that a lot. Even some people sort of tongue in cheek, what is there, pictures of you out there somewhere? And, no, it wasn't that. I think, frankly, just from, it was intuitive to me that this was going to become an issue, that women were going to be the victims. And then through the process, it was a 3-year process of moving the bill through the legislature, and we had a version signed, and then it was struck down, and all this legal drama. But it was the stories coming out that validated, that we need to do this. We need to get ahead of the curve. I was frustrated a bit by, we had to sort of narrow it beyond what I was hoping for, namely to have an intent to cause harm. That's difficult to prove.
Yeah, it is.
You had a number of women also that said, well, will this apply to me? This happened to me like a year ago. So, we can't have, retroactive bills, ex post facto bills. Yeah. So it was hard, but they all understood and were glad that at least it would try to prevent future victims or reduce the number of victims down the line.
Right. Let's put a finer point on the harm before we start to unpack some of these legal fixes that you all addressed. With civil remedies, there are some hurdles, as we both know. In short, there's this law called Section 230 of the federal the Communications Decency Act, which, to give an overview, basically prevents victims of revenge porn from suing the data, the platforms where this stuff is hosted. So whether it be X or Meta or Instagram or Discord or wherever it is, it's very difficult to go and sue those entities for hosting because it's one of their users that made the choice to put it on there.
Yeah.
And while we've seen some civil judgments in cases around the country, on smaller person-to-person lawsuits and whatnot, do you feel like this problem with civil remedies kind of highlights the gap in the criminal arena?
Yeah, for sure. And we didn't pursuing things civilly on the one hand, it's a lower burden of proof, so that's helpful. But there can be other obstacles, other liability protections that platforms or others have, and so then it's hard to pursue. And civil remedy, I mean, okay, so maybe you can get some sort of judgment, and maybe there's a financial, compensation, but whether or not that puts all the pieces back together, it seems unlikely. Again, you can't unring that bell. So we really needed to step in and say, this isn't just about the civil side; it's a criminal offense. And because now the internet is literally both the whole world. It's not like you have a picture of somebody, the old Polaroid picture, you share it with somebody, that one person sees it, okay, however damaging that is. You can literally share it with the billions of people. And so we actually have a distinction in the level of felony if that's the way you're sharing a photo. But we needed to make sure we're cracking down on the behavior, not just that there's a civil remedy for folks, but that we are acknowledging this kind of behavior is intolerable, and a person who's doing this is hurting somebody to a degree where they need to have a felony as a punishment.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And what I don't think that people realize is the prevalence of the sharing. Yeah. And I've been working in digital investigations for coming on 20 years, and the international sharing community of graphic images is beyond the scope of what most people are aware of. And oftentimes, we'll get a case that's referred from Interpol that had a server that was taken down in Eastern Europe. And, that one server takedown identified IP addresses all over the world that were using that server to share images that were illegal in various jurisdictions. And so what you bring up a very valid point. This is not a Polaroid. This is a digital copy that can be replicated millions of times and spread to every computer in the world, hypothetically.
Yeah.
Now, how does the legal definition of consent, in your opinion, kind of diverge from what actually happens in relationships and breakups? Because that gets very hazy in this context.
Yeah. So there's a few ingredients to trigger a revenge porn statute. One is obviously we had to be talking about a nude or sexual image. But in addition, it has to have been shared with an expectation of privacy. And then between the one person and the other, and then the other who receives it then has to share it with the intent to cause harm. Frankly, the intent to cause harm was the most problematic to me, because that's hard. How you prove somebody's intention beyond a reasonable doubt is difficult. Plus, they could easily say, well, I wanted to sell it. I wasn't trying to hurt the person. I just wanted to make money, or I thought it'd be funny. Or you could come up with any number of ways that you could see where it sort of starts to undermine the statute, and yet the person is still absolutely victimized. And so we had lots of legal debate over how to try to go after that. But ultimately, we ended up with those three ingredients. They do have to have an intent to cause harm. We did make exceptions for, if you're trying to report something to law enforcement or trying to do good, that falls into a different category as well.
On the line of the consent issue, that kind of brings us to your bill that was passed in 2025, SB 1462, which added in an AI aspect.
Right, yeah.
Now, the deep fake or the AI technology is something that I started hearing about roughly, I'd say 5 or 6 years ago. It was during COVID, where we had a defendant claiming deep fake on some images and some audio. What was it that you saw that made you realize that a revision and an update needed to be made?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was similar, frankly, to knowing that we needed to have a law in the first place, was seeing this rapid change in technology. Technology can be very exciting, but can also create pathways for folks to unfortunately harm other people. And realizing that those ingredients I talked about before, one of which is if it's shared without, in the context of a secret, relationship, that is not even in play when you're talking about deep fakes. And deep fakes today aren't just, splicing someone's picture over top of some other body. It looks absolutely real. I mean, you can create whole videos. It's exciting and frightening. And so again, it wasn't hard to see how, oh wow, this is going to cause a whole other way to hurt somebody. It's technically not a nude picture, an actual picture of the woman, let's say, but it can have the same sort of professional damage or be used coercively. And so we needed to figure out how can we get at that, which is kind of adjacent, but where this consensual, there was no relationship there. It could be a perfect stranger. And that's why we had to come up with this legislation that modified or really tacked on this AI, realistic images component to the law. And
I think one of the instances that I think most of our listeners would have known about is the Taylor Swift issue.
Sure.
There was an image that was taken of her and it was converted to a pornographic image and shared.
Yeah.
Now in that instance, there was obviously no consent, no relationship between the perpetrator and Ms. Swift. And yet her depiction was created and spread all over the world. How does your revision in 1462, your AI update, handle situations where a relationship already did exist?
Well, if a relationship did exist, then you have sort of two possible applications of the law. If it's an actual nude photo, then again, the previous law was already there. The ingredients are there. But the consent, which is what matters here, really only comes into play when it's an actual photo they sent somebody. If it's a digitally created photo, they had no participation in, then it follows a little bit of a different formula. And that formula still has, if you have to be intending to cause harm, but we set aside this idea of consent because it's not applicable. It doesn't matter whether they knew the person or not. There was no sort of way to consent. And it only applies when the photo or whatever it is created that triggers the law, meaning it creates the nudity, or creates the sexual activity that makes it wrong in the first place.
Okay. So you've got then essentially two violations. Number one, you're creating a sexual image of someone and sharing that. I guess I should rephrase that. Under the old law, before deepfake technology existed, you would have to have obtained a nude photo or a sexually explicit photo.
That's right.
And sharing that would be the violation.
Correct.
Now, under this new legislation, not only can you obtain that photo, but you can modify it and create it into something even more damaging.
Sure.
And share that. So
now it doesn't have to be an actual photo that someone sent to somebody else. It can be just created, as long as it's meeting all the other criteria. We do make exceptions for free speech reasons, for satire, parody, something that's in the public interest, which is sort of a legal term. Then you can get away with this. Although I don't love it because, again, it's like, what of a sexual or nude nature is going to be the public interest? But setting that aside, we did make for free speech protections. I'm a strong supporter of free speech. We made those exceptions, but otherwise, if it's, again, having the same effect, and you don't even have to have sent it, like in the first law, again, you can question someone's judgment. Hey, should you have sent a picture of yourself to that person? Some people say, they should never have done that, so that serves them right. Well, that's a bad way to think about it. But in this other case, they didn't send anything.
Right.
The person just created it. And yet it has this, and it looks exactly as if it was a real picture and has the same effect. And you can say all day long, it's not me. And maybe today, because of how realistic things are, people might believe you and many won't believe you. And so again, you have this consequence, and you didn't do anything to participate in that.
Well, and that's what we're getting into just as a society, is the question about what is real. 10 years ago, or when I started in this industry, if we had a video of a crime, we could be pretty sure that crime occurred.
Yeah.
Now, there'd be some questions about the clarity of the video and the foundation, whatnot, but people did not have the ability on their smartphones to create an image of a homicide.
Yeah.
Now they do. And the ability to verify whether something is created by AI or whether it's an actual image captured on a high resolution camera, to my understanding at this point, based on my conversations with our forensics experts, is still possible. But I would imagine as technology progresses,
harder and harder,
that those loopholes are going to close.
Yeah.
And so I guess that would take us down a completely different rabbit hole of how do we even prove what is real or not in the future, because our ability to distinguish the two is going away.
Yeah, that's a very fair concern. You can't believe your eyes necessarily anymore. In the case of this statute, the penalty for a realistic but completely invented, fabricated, image is the penalty is less than if it was a real thing. So if a victim is coming forward, they're going to say, hey, this is real or it's not real. They're the ones that are going to identify. If it's real, presumably they'd have the original image, and they could sort of show how it's real, demonstrate that it's authentic. And then there's a higher penalty. If it's not real, that's harder to maybe, I don't have something to show that it's not real, but it's a lower penalty. So we wanted to be sensitive to the real versus not real dynamic. But yeah, it's tough. I mean, I don't know that there's any perfect law out there. All you can do is try to come up with something to protect people as much as possible.
And I'll say that's one thing. I mean, as you know, I'm married to someone in politics. We discuss the laws that you all work on together, and there is no perfect law. There's no perfect solution. You can't legislate everything. You can't legislate morality. Yeah. What were the most common objections and hurdles that you felt that you had to overcome by the public and by different interest groups in passing even this updated AI law?
Yeah, there was only one really, and it was free speech concerns. When we passed the original, mostly the ACLU tried to make the case that, oh, this would, if some parent showed a picture of their infant naked, then they could be prosecuted, which was, if you read the law, that was not really the case. But mostly those were the types of concerns. The public interest exception, again, is a free speech oriented sensitivity. We have to acknowledge that by putting those in there, it will mean that there will be victims who are not able to get justice because it's just too hard to navigate the carve-outs we had to create in order to protect free speech. But again, I'm a pretty radical First Amendment guy.
Right.
Didn't necessarily agree with the ACLU on this one, but that was, whether you're talking the original revenge porn or this revision to it, the free speech concerns were always out there. To me, when you're talking sexual nudity, my sensitivity to free speech starts to go down a bit, especially when there are victims. But we did create a carve out for something that's maybe a public figure that for whatever reason there's a public interest in some nude photo. Again, hard for me to see that, but we had to in order to avoid lawsuits and that sort of thing, we had to include those.
Right. I've got so many areas that would be fascinating to discuss. I agree with you on the free speech issue. I would believe that the mindset here more aligns with libel and slander. We all have free speech, but when that crosses into libel and slander, causing harm, sometimes irreparable harm to someone else by something you say or print, and that can be quantified and you put a value to, that's something that can be held against someone civilly.
Civilly, right.
Was that in any way some of the guardrails that you all used in creating your policies?
Right. So I use the word guardrails loosely because I didn't necessarily agree with them, but in the interest of compromise and avoiding lots of litigation. For instance, intent to cause harm versus harm. From my perspective, you harmed the person. Whether you intended to or not, you harmed that person. There has to be a consequence. That was not good enough. There had to be an intent there, which is, again, harder to prove. And I don't know if it's easy to get around, but there are ways to get around it. So I don't love that. But again, being sensitive to free speech concerns, we had to try to strike that right balance. Whether or not, sexual images of somebody should be a free speech issue is some other constitutional lawyer can debate that.
Right. Well, this is speak on the First Amendment issue. We're getting into just this week a pretty heated First Amendment controversy that hopefully we're going to address in future episodes in folks' ability to share, what some are calling hate speech, and that can be defined by different groups and by the person making the claim. If the intent aspect, because it sounds like you were going for what's known as a strict liability standard, which, for the listeners out there, that would apply to speeding, for example. If you're going 50 in a 35, it doesn't matter if you meant to or you didn't. It's strict liability. You did it. Where intent is required, such as in your bill, they have to show that there was some thought or a belief or an end goal in mind when deciding to make that decision. If that is so difficult to prove, do you have any practical changes in the bill or updates that you feel would be beneficial to those looking to prosecute under this law? Or is the lowering of the intent where that would lie completely?
That's a really good question. When we passed, so the history of the bill, we passed the bill in 2014. The ACLU sued because, again, I didn't have this intent to cause harm. And so it played out over a couple years where eventually I decided, during that time we had no law in the books because an injunction was placed. And so I'm thinking, how many more people are being victimized while we pursue the better version of the law, in my view. So I sort of conceded, all right, we'll go with the narrow version so we can be done with this, because I didn't know how many years it would play out. I'm not anxious to repeat that.
Can't imagine.
But I will say, in going through this year's bill, we were able to, navigate the issue of consent, which the ACLU and others had insisted on back then, by adding an exception that's in the public interest, which, you've got to try to prove that. So it was a little more even to me. And so in the back of my mind, I had this thought, well, could we just apply that to the entire law? So whether you're talking an actual picture or a created picture, that if you make this public interest exception, can you then otherwise, by having that exception there, get away with pursuing a more a fairer law that doesn't have as many loopholes, even though it has that one public interest exception?
Okay. And I think and maybe this is another topic for a future discussion, is folks often think of intent with in the context of, let's say, a homicide, whether someone acted in the heat of passion, whether they accidentally committed something, whether they planned it, premeditated it, if they committed an act that they knew would cause physical harm, or if they should have known, reckless versus negligence. So it's a very complex issue that often is misunderstood by the public that hears it.
Yeah.
Now, looking ahead, between the issues that updated technology are providing, pretty much anyone with a Google account can create a video on whatever they want. There's some community standards, but the technology is now out there and it is developing at a rapid pace. I want you to address this as a legislator, and tell me about your experience in working with coalitions and with Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Libertarians, and we have some here. Was this an issue that got bipartisan support, and can we expect that going forward, do you think?
Yeah, so the good news is not every high-profile issue at the Capitol is a partisan one. And in this case, I didn't find much partisan resistance. In fact, even though the ACLU was opposed to my bill back in the day, I still had broad bipartisan support. And so even folks that might be more sensitive to their, I guess they're a special interest group, to their perspective, still voted with me because they could see the harms. And again, this year as well, now I actually worked with them through the process. And so at the end, there wasn't any organized opposition that I'm aware of, even though there had been initially. But yeah, I think everyone acknowledged this was an issue. Whether they had heard about it through, some friend of theirs or secondhand, it was just sort of intuitive. Like, yeah, this is not okay to hurt somebody in this way. And in this new deep fake era, which God knows where it's going to go even just 5 years from now, we have to be proactive. I think one of the lingering questions, and this was one of my seatmates introduced a bill on this, was, again, with how realistic things can be, what happens then when you get into like child pornography? The Supreme Court in the past did strike down bans on virtual child pornography. But they kind of left open the doors like, well, if one day it's indistinguishable from what is real, maybe we'll revisit that. We're probably there.
Right.
And so my seatmate, Julie Willoughby, did run a bill that was sort of trying to tackle that, and it doesn't have the same sorts of exceptions. And so, we'll see how that plays out if folks want to litigate that. But I think that is probably sort of like the next issue, is when, again, something is not just involving another person, but a child.
And I think it goes to show where we are as a society when we have to have those discussions. Unfortunately, the common belief or the common argument that has been involved in that litigation over the years is the desire or the market generates the creation. And before, you had victims that were being victimized to generate the creation. But now we're moving into a time where non-victims can generate the creation of these illegal images to then sell. And so the arguments going forward are going to be a lot more complex.
They will be, for sure,
than what we experienced even a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
What do you think that we should watch for in the next year or two as far as the technology risks, as far as the revenge porn issue? With the social media is here, it doesn't seem to be going away, and kids' access to smartphones and these platforms is skyrocketing.
Mm-hmm.
We're both parents. What do you think is good advice for parents and decision makers to look for in the next year or so?
I'll start with the last part of your question, which is what can parents do? I mean, we need to be involved. Maybe consider not getting your little kid a smartphone
Right.
until they're much, older. And there are some who subscribe to a school of thought like, oh, we don't want to invade our kids' privacy. And eventually, as they get older, yes, that is true. But for much of their younger years, no, we absolutely as parents need to be engaged, need to be, figuring out what are they looking at, who's maybe reaching out to them that we don't know. I don't think you can overdo it really as a parent to protect your kid. I have a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And so obviously those younger ages especially. But to the future, I think one of the questions is going to be, as we seek to protect kids, what is the U.S. Supreme Court going to be okay with? We have these laws that we pursued in Arizona, Texas, and other places where it's like, hey, we need these platforms to age verify who's getting on. And again, you end up in free speech arguments and claims, and where that goes in light of how prevalent the web is, the fact that it can be accessed in the palm of our hands, the fact that we can't even distinguish now between what's real and fake, and how quickly things can spread in a damaging way. It's a different time than it was just in the 90s. And so how the courts navigate that is going to be really interesting to watch.
And I think you hit a very valid point that we can never overestimate the strong parental involvement in the life of your teenager or your child or even your 20-year-old.
Sure.
And exposing them to the reality of the consequences that some of their decisions have is extremely vital. While I agree with you on the need for parents to be honestly violating their children's privacy all the time, they're not to an age where they can make solid decisions. Right. We've seen this in Supreme Court decisions time and time again, that children don't have a fully developed brain to see the total ramifications of what they're doing and what the end result of their decisions is.
Yep, absolutely.
And I think that needs to be driven home time and time again. In Arizona, where can, if someone is a victim and gets shown that someone has shared an image online, is this something that they should contact their police about, the school teacher about? What steps should they normally take if that's the case?
The simplest would be then call the police. Ultimately, where it's going to end up is, it's your county attorney probably, who will have to look at the facts and circumstances and see, if they have a case. That's on the criminal side. The civil side is a whole different matter. You can hire an attorney who will probably take some chunk of potential settlement down the road. So those are sort of two different pathways. But right away, you probably want to start by calling the police. And not every law enforcement entity is fully knowledgeable on even what they should do. I know 10 years ago, it was like if you called the police about a nude image, they'd be like, I don't even know what to do. There's a little more awareness now. Revenge porn is sort of, out there. People know what the sort of shorthand term is referring to. And so you'll probably have better luck, but ultimately the other person or entity you can go to, if not your local law enforcement, is you'd call the county attorney's office and let them know that you've been victimized in this way, and then they'll intake you and go from there.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And this isn't just the law. This is about dignity, about safety, about restoring control to someone's life. Senator, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I want to thank you for taking the time and energy and effort to pass this legislation. I know that it's never an easy task to pass paragraphs of new law into the books, and hopefully with the changes in technology and as things advance, we can modify our laws to keep protecting our children and hopefully change the hearts and minds of parents and those that are sharing and creating these images to just knock it off.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to Truth Be Found. The hunt for answers never stops, and neither do we. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us online to stay in the loop. Remember, truth has a way of coming to light, Until next time, keep your head up and your eyes sharp.